All right. Well, great to be here again to talk about EB5, talk about US real estate, South African real estate. And we are joined today by the president and CEO of Real Estate Magazine, Neil Peterson, who previously was a guest here with us, and Sonia Clark, who heads up our efforts in South Africa. I'm Manuel Ortiz, the Vice President of Global Business Development for First Pathway Partners. And Neil, it's great to have you again. Your track record, your experience, you've interviewed former President Trump, have some great publications. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started.
No, thank you very much, Manuel. It's absolutely wonderful being here again today.
And by the way,
And
it looks like you're reaching us from the CNN control room over there. It's a really nice background that you have.
I've actually been to the CNN studio in Atlanta, actually. So
Oh,
I know
nice.
exactly what you're talking about. So maybe I got my inspiration from them. Yes, no,
Great.
well, Manuel, thank you. Thank you. It's absolutely wonderful having, being here and yeah, it's just been, it's wonderful. The whole EB5 program, it's a great chat that we can get into, a lot of moving parts, a lot of things that people need to consider. But, working with you guys, I've seen you've really got a great product there. And yeah, so a little bit about myself. So, I've run a real estate publication. We do events. We essentially communicate to mainly South African investors, but mainly also African investors. But we've got a big following in the US. We also got a big following in the UK and those kind of markets because it's digital. It's REI, rei.co.za. That's a website that we're on, and we've been around since 2007. And so we report up to date, keep it up to date, where to invest, how to invest in real estate. We've managed to bring a number of investors to the US from South Africa to buy US real estate. That was probably about 7, 8, 9 years ago. So I'm familiar with the markets, and yes, it's just great being on the show. Thank you very much for the invitation, Manuel.
Yo, thank you so much. Truly appreciate it. And Sonia, if you want to talk a little bit about your background with First Pathway Partners, you head up our South African efforts and just have an outstanding track record experience in working with people and trying to achieve the American dream through our projects.
Absolutely. Thank you, Manuel. And thank you, Neil. Always great to see you and speak to you. What a wonderful human being. And also very knowledgeable. So thank you so much. Yes, so my track record goes back starting in real estate, going into banking, and then getting involved with all the international chambers of commerce. And in 2010, I was invited by an immigration attorney to start getting involved in EB5. So yes, I've been through a lot of the changes, a lot of the reauthorization of EB5, and yes, dealt with various South African families that want to immigrate to the United States. We had a short lapse, as you know, waiting for the reauthorization. One or two of our investors landed up in the UK waiting, but eventually, as of, I think it was the end of last year, beginning of this year, those authorizations started coming through. So yes, very happy to be involved in EB5, very interesting. Industry is always changing and there's a lot of players and a lot of information out there. So I think it's just important for investors just to get the right information. And it's a good start with us.
Yes, no, thank you so much for that. And maybe we can get started and start discussions with just talking about just real estate in general and what's happening with real estate in the South African market. And Neil, you're there on the ground and seeing what's happening there with real estate. Maybe if you give us a little background of some of the things that you're seeing. I know you're in an election year, so that's
Yes.
something that is different. And then also, from what I've been able to read as well, is that there seems to be a lot of social issues, political issues that are also impacting the market. But it does also seem that, once you get past election, things might be turning a little bit. And so maybe if you could add a little bit of insight as to what's happening there.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. So yes, so the South African property market, as we would call it, is, for the last, I would say 10, 12 years has really been chugging along. It hasn't really probably been performing as it should do. And a number of reasons for that. I mean, South Africa being a lot smaller than, the US. I mean, we typically the size of one of your smaller states. So it's, and, so that's kind of the size of our, our economy. So, but the market, I think it has a lot of beauty, has a lot of other things going for it in certain areas, a lot of minerals and all that kind of stuff. So in terms of real estate, it varies from obviously area to area. We've got 9 what we call provinces, and you would call states, and it varies from each one of them. Where I come from, it's the Western Cape. It's by far the best performing area. I mean, and the reason is because our municipalities have been failing dismally, but really dismally in the other 8 provinces, which has affected property prices, it's affected the property market, and it's also caused the mass migration of people moving on to better services into the Western Cape area, for example. And so all the outlying areas have benefited because of this migration. Very similar to what happens in the US, where people like to go from colder states like, New York State, and they go to the south, like, states like Arizona. But this one is slightly different. This is definitely not weather. This is services which are offered by our government, which is not, it's inferior services. So what's happened is that in the Western Cape, you see that there's massive demand for rental accommodation. It's not uncommon to find 25 people queuing for one property, to kind of, access one property. And so that's a big sort of game changer. And I think if you look at the Western Cape versus the other 9 or other 8 provinces, it's a bit of an anomaly. You can't really look at the market over and just say South Africa. You've got to look at Western Cape and sort of pull it apart. So it's slightly different, and it has, it's close to the sea. It's has wine farms, tropical type, climates. We now in our autumn, which you would call the fall, and so certainly, very different. But if you look at pricing, I mean, the market could have performed a lot better if things weren't managed that well. I mean, I think the average home price in the US is something like $495,000. And I mean, in the dollar equivalent in South Africa, you're probably looking at $140,000. So it's just to kind of just give you like a comparative term in US dollar terms. And if you look over a period of time, you'd see the US market has certainly outperformed South Africa, but it's very different. Everything is bricks and mortar in most cases, but we noticed that properties, certainly in the last 10 years, are getting smaller. So if you want to get an apartment or even a condo or whatever you call it in the US, apartment, condo, we would call a flat or a maisonette, or even, townhouse type apartment. We've seen that they're all getting very smaller. So the space is starting to run out. So there's a lot of pros and cons, and if we had to sort of go into the US market, you can't just talk about one state, you need to talk about all of them, because there's some really, really powerful markets in the US doing exceptionally well, and there's those that are not doing so well. And there's all, you got to really find the dynamics and get to understand what is driving the pricing. So just as an introduction, that's kind of what's going on. I don't know if you want me to elaborate a little bit more, but certainly I think it's we're hoping this election we get a new government. We've run this country for 30 years because it impacts our daily lives, certainly in terms of municipal services.
Thank you for that. That's great background. And maybe if you and Sonia can elaborate a little bit. And Sonia, if you're working with South African families on a daily basis, but maybe we could get a sense for in the US, it's going to be a little bit different. And I'll talk about, what's happening with interest rates and those things. But maybe if both of you can give me a sense, and Sonia, please go ahead and start with how South African families are feeling relative to the value of real estate. I think right in for example, in the US, what you're hearing is, okay, real estate is still very expensive, rent is very high, and those things. But from what Neil was saying right now, that a lot of the feeling that South Africans have is the service aspect of things. But maybe if you could talk a little bit just about value and those things.
Sure, no problem. So, just coming to mind is a particular investor that we had, up in Johannesburg, in Stain City, and they were trying for 2 years to sell their property. And in those 2 years, it became increasingly basically impossible to get their price. So, we're finding in Johannesburg, particularly, that property prices have dropped dramatically. And as Neil says, the services aren't there. Just driving around Johannesburg, to give you an idea, the roads are not being repaired. The water is a major problem. Neil will know about that as well, and the other South Africans. So it's really just the current government. I think the frustrations coming in with everybody that, water infrastructure is crumbling. And yes, the municipalities, they're not delivering the services. And of course, we've got the Eskom problem. And, just looking at the general trend, they call it the Cape exit, where a lot of Joburgers, as we call them, people from Gauteng, they are moving to the Western Cape. And, it's a different world. It's a different country, literally on its own. Everything works. Their roads are immaculate. I mean, you go through Cape Town city center and everything is clean. You got that whole European feel. There's a lot of international property owners there as well, which is also driving property prices up in Cape Town. But all in all, a lot of people in Joburg are feeling, because the rates and taxes are so high, just for services, they'd much rather sell their homes and rent something, so they don't have the headache at the end of the day, to fix their properties and to pay those high rates. So in comparison, a lot of the investors that we're talking to and have spoken to in the past, not even lately, I mean, just going back 5 years, a lot of them are selling up their homes and assets and some of them businesses and investing their rands into the US dollar because it's a lot more stable. And so I think more or less, talking about the one investor that you and I have been working on as well, they call it multifamily homes or investments. So it's like sectional title on our side. And, those are outperforming properties in South Africa. So for those that are looking at hedging against the dollar, I think a lot of people are looking at selling up. And yes, most definitely investing into, international real estate, and particularly the United States real estate. So yes.
Neil, are there any insights that you want to add to some of the things that Sonia mentioned?
Yeah. So I absolutely concur. Look, obviously, as you mentioned, there's a big exit out from up north, and I think what's happened with the South African rand in particular is it's devalued significantly over the last 10 to 12 years. So a lot of people have diversified their wealth, whether it's in investment or whether it's in real estate, and they've actually moved their wealth out of the country. There's a significant, I don't have the number, but it's in the trillion rands, so which is minuscule in US dollars. So it's in the billions of the dollars, but we don't know how many billion, but it's certainly a big number that's exited, and it's parked in other jurisdictions around the world, including the US. The US is still the dollar, that, currency that people tend to trade with and that kind of thing. And yeah, look, the real estate markets are very different, because while the municipal services are falling apart in South Africa, a lot of people that live up north, up in Johannesburg, certainly where Sonia comes from, live in an estate. So generally the estate is run and managed and, run by the state operator. And normally the services within that estate is okay. But if you don't have electricity, that's a little bit of a problem. Or if you don't have water, and I think that's the basic services. If you speak to Sonia, she will tell you they've actually run out of water. So the equivalent, so the equivalent of the single family home would be a freehold property Sectional title would be more, Sonia, very similar to, I would say, the apartment type living. And they also have homeowners associations as well in the US, because I've worked with quite a lot. So freehold would be a standalone property like a single family home, for example. And I think where South Africa is different, it's sort of in an estate environment, whether it's a golf estate or whether it's other, it doesn't have to equestrian estate or something like that. So you'd find that to be slightly different. So there are people living in bubbles within. You mentioned Stain City as well there, Sonia, which is probably the leading, property development in South Africa by a country mile. So certainly I think, and I mean, it has a lot of all the fancy stuff over there. So if you had to compare in US terms and you had to buy the equivalent in US, you would have to pay significantly more, but you are in a US dollar in a very powerful currency. So that's what you got to understand. So diversification of wealth is a big thing. And I think I mentioned earlier, excuse me, about taking investors. I mean, we took about 100 investors to the US in 2012, and to Atlanta area in particular. I mean, houses free, single family homes were selling for, I think, between $80,000 and $140,000. And now I think they're more in the $250+ So everybody made their money, first of all, just on the capital growth, but secondly, they also made it on the currency, because the currency at that time was 7-1. And today it's now, well, it's almost 20. So it's like, which is crazy. So there's a double whammy for South Africans over there, where they made their money, one on the currency, two on the capital growth, which is a significant return.
Well, I think both of you bring up some really good points, and how this pertains to EB5, and why it's important. It is that also, EB5 motivations around the world can be different, but a lot of it is tied by one thing, and that's achieving the American dream. And what does that actually mean? And I think that, some of the issues that you've mentioned, that with what's happening in South Africa with some of the basic services, what's happening with real estate there, where, the values can be quite lower than what you're seeing in the US. I think that, one of the motivations for people to look at EB5, and just really quickly for those of you that aren't aware of the EB5 program, that EB5 program was created by the US government back in 1990 as a way to spur economic development in the US. And it allows for the applicant, the spouse, and unmarried children under the age of 21 to obtain permanent US residency. And so what's interesting is that it's a migration product through investment in US, primarily real estate, but you can also invest in different types of things as well. But real estate really has been the tried and true form of investment for the EB5 program, just because of some of the requirements that EB5 allows. But I think, just to keep things very simple, it allows the family to obtain US residency. And sometimes you see people from different countries want EB5 because their children want to study in the US, and they want to give them the ability to be able to come to university, study here, and with a US residency, be able to work wherever they want. When you come with a student visa and you graduate, you have to find sponsorship, and most corporations aren't sponsoring anymore. And even if they are, you basically have a lottery system, where I think maybe even like 2 years ago, there were 700,000 applications or something like that. And only 14 to 15% went through. So it really is a lottery. And so you can imagine, if you're an international student that finishes in the top 5%, worked extremely hard to be at the top of the class, and then you graduate and now you can't find a job because somebody isn't sponsoring you. Well, through the EB5 program, you can work wherever you want and not have to depend on only the corporations that are sponsoring you. So there's a big value there. And other times, people just want to migrate to the US because of things that are happening in their home country, whether it's security, whether it's social, economical issues, and those sorts of things. So it does open a new pathway for families to migrate to the US. I think you both bring something up that is really important and actually very interesting about the EB5 program when you're talking about the value of money, because I mentioned that it's an investment. And sometimes when investors think of investment, the first thing that they think of is, okay, what are the returns going to be? But I would say that in the time you mentioned your trip to Atlanta, right? And how, when you got in at that time, the 140,000 value of a house. That value, specifically in that market, which is one of the hottest markets in the U.S., is significantly more than that now. And I would say it's more than double. But I would say that an EB5 investment also should be looked at as a conservation could be looked at as a conservation of capital play, right? Because if you're investing, the investment amount is $800,000. And if you're investing $800,000 in a investment product for EB5, your returns aren't going to be as high typically, right? Higher return, higher risk. So it's going to be conservative, but you're at least going to be invested in a U.S. real estate product that more than likely will be able to hold its value in the event that your home country has some form of a devaluation. And I think that's something that you've seen, Sonia, with some of the families that you've worked in, maybe that invested back in 2017, 2018, and you look at with what's happened, they've been able to conserve the value of their money through those investments. Not saying that that always happens, but that is one of the benefits that could happen. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So Neil, I can't remember back 2017, 2018. I think the rand to the dollar was 16, and then it started climbing towards 17 at that stage. So, and also at one stage, the EB5 program was $500,000, and then I had to get reauthorized. And the Senate then increased it because EB5 hadn't been increased for a significant amount of years, increased it to $800,000. And I think the most important thing that one has to remember is to get in early, because if your oldest child or your only child turns 21, you'd have to do another EB5 for that child. And I think those that got in early, it was a really great thing. Just going back, reflecting on the investor from Stan City, unfortunately, what happened is, because he couldn't sell his property, not that he didn't have the funds, but I mean, that was the top of funds. His daughter turned 21 in the process. So, I mean, we were looking, she had months to go, and we were hoping and praying that they'd sell their property. But at the end of the day, yes, we had COVID in between, but at least, at the end of the day, their funds were safe, they were secure. The projects, obviously, I think we're going to get to that later. You got to look at your investment of the company that you're investing through. And I mean, FEP's got 100% success rate. So, investors knew, look, their money's safe. Construction began again, and life continued, and tourism just went through the roof because, everybody wanted to get out of their homes. They were locked down, and everything became, let's get closer to nature. And I think, just having a look at our projects that we have, and our new project, that's exactly, sort of where we're looking at, and where tourism's booming, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea is, we don't know where the rand's going to go to. Listen to people like Darby Ritt and some of the economists. And it's actually quite scary, what they're predicting the rand to go to. So yes, I would say, if it's possible, hedge against the rand, but you're also going to find it very difficult right now, to get your Reserve Bank clearance and your funds out the country. I think that is a major issue also to consider. So yeah, and also, if I may say, we've got some recent investors. Now that there's been changes in EB5, they want to get to the US a lot sooner. A birth of a child, for instance, or, just fear of what's going to be happening post-elections. We look at those scenarios, and, in January, so to say, those investors started talking to us. And we have the capability now of offering a rural project, which we'll get into a little bit later, which really does fast track your EB5, with expedited processing. But yes, I'm talking too much now and getting ahead of myself. Thanks, Manuel.
No, not at all. I think this was, you
Mhm.
brought up some really good points, and I think you touched on track record and First Pathways track record. And like I would just say that the important thing is for us, we have a 100% track record in investors obtaining their permanent green cards, as you mentioned. I think that's really important. And if you want to understand the mechanics of EB5 without getting into too much detail, basically it comes down to no different than the transactions that you would see, Neil, where let's say Sonia wants to build a hotel and it's going to cost her $20 million. She has her equity. Let's say she has $5 million of her equity to invest to the project, but she still needs to get $15 million. And so that $15 million, she would come to First Pathway Partners, and we would act just like a lender. And we would have $15 million to lend to her, just like a normal lender would, right? This would be more of a private lending structure where we would provide, perhaps a senior loan for $15 million. And Sonia would put in her $5 million of equity, and that would complete the cost of the project. And we would loan it out over a period of years. Typically, the time frame is going to be 4 to 6 years. And when the project is over, investors then get their capital back. There is a return component there, but in a nutshell, that's basically the way that the EB5 investment part of it works. I would say that as investors, it's always very important to understand that EB5 has two independent processes moving in parallel. So you just think through two timelines. One timeline is going to be the immigration process, which you would have to work with an experienced immigration attorney to be able to document your case for the US government. And then on the other side, you have the actual investment of your $800,000 that we would aggregate in a fund and loaned it out to the developer over a period of time. They would be paying interest just like a normal loan. And that's the way that EB5 works. So you just think about it that way. Sometimes the investment timeline can tie exactly to what the immigration process is. Sometimes it doesn't. And so I think those are the questions that, as you have discussions with Sonia and myself, that we'll be able to provide more details on. But that's typically the way that EB5 works. And that's why we feel that, it's a very powerful tool, because it also is an investment. But, the important thing is that it does open the pathway for your family to be able to establish their business in the US. We're working with some investors now, Sonia, that are looking to expand their South African businesses in the US. Other families that we've talked to are just looking at this as an investment tool for their children, so they can study in the US and give them the freedom to decide whether they want to stay here in the US after they graduate or not, or at least give them the choice to do something like that. And so I think, it's a very powerful tool, but I think the most important thing is to be able to conduct your due diligence on the people and the companies that you're investing with, because that's been really important. And maybe you could talk a little bit about Mr. Kraft and our founder and his role at IUSA and just our track record.
Sure. So as Manuel said, we've got 100% success rate on green card issuance. Mr. Bob Kraft is one of the most incredible human beings, a leader in EB5, a leader in actually upscaling, upscaling downtown Milwaukee, where our head office is. And Mr. Kraft was elected president of IUSA, which is Invest in the USA. And our competitors actually voted for Mr. Kraft, and Mr. Kraft also spearheaded, the reform of the EB5 program to protect investors and to make sure the integrity of the projects are intact. And also, with USCIS, certain filings had to be done. Anyone in foreign countries, that's a promoter of EB5 has to be registered and approved by USCIS. And I think those are probably one of the most important considerations, when you look at investing as well. So not just the track record, how long has the regional center been operational? Some regional centers, there's new ones coming in all the time. You got to look at their projects. What kind of projects have they completed in the past? Successful projects. And yes, I would say most certainly I'm very proud to be part of First Pathway Partners, you know, obviously because Mr. Croft is our CEO, and gives a lot of guidance, you know, in terms of the industry and things like that. So, yes, I think our investors can be rest assured in terms of our knowledge, you know, on EB5 and what investors need to look out for, you know, what not to do, and kind of when they do their due diligence processes, you know, we educate our investors so they know exactly when they're investing into their EB5 project, exactly what they're investing into. And, you know, it's a service we provide. We're available 24/7. You know, we look after the investor throughout the process. Because I'm based in South Africa, I'm available 24/7. So you don't have to wait 7 hours or whatever, you know, amount of time it is to be able to get hold of anybody in the US. And I think it places us in a very unique situation, you know, with having myself as a regional director for First Pathway Partners in South Africa. And of course, we get many investors also, not just from here, but also across Africa. And yes, we gladly assist anybody, you know, come ask us any questions. We're available on WhatsApp. And so, yes, is there anything else that I've missed, Manuel?
No, I think you did a great job. It's really about the people. The EB5 program is a long process. As I mentioned, it can be 4 to 6 years on the investment side, on the immigration side. You know, right now, one of the exciting things is that processing times are a lot faster than what they have been in the past. So, you know, that process could potentially be quicker or just the same as the investment process. So I think, you know, those things are really important, but it's just important to invest with people that you have a good feel for their track record and that are transparent. Because, you know, one of the things and again, without getting into too much detail about project structure and those things, we can talk about that as you reach out to us individually. But I think that the project structures can get quite sophisticated. And the example that I gave was where, you know, if Sonia is building a hotel, costs $20 million, you know, she's investing $5 million of her own money, and we're loaning out 15 million. Typically, that's going to be what's called a senior loan, where we have the EB5 investors have first priority of repayment. So if the project doesn't work out, Sonia's in the riskiest position with her $5 million. And then keep in mind that that $20 million is the cost of the project. Once it's built out, the thought there is that there's an appreciation value, there's a value there after something is built. People, if it's a hotel, people are actually staying there, you have cash flows, and now the value is going to be more than $20 million. Maybe it's 30 or $40 million later, right? But as the senior lender, you know, once this loan matures, we're concerned with getting our $15 million back, right? And so there, the EB5 investors are in the first position. And so it's projected to be a conservative structure because you're in a senior loan position. And so that's what that's referred to. But I think it's important that as you're conducting your due diligence, obviously you want to do your due diligence on the companies that you're investing with, but on the project level, it's really important to understand the investment structure that you're actually in. Sometimes, you know, there's a thought that, hey, we need another bank involved in this, but you have to be very careful about how that other bank is actually involved. Do they have priority to the loan that we're giving, or do we have priority of repayment to the investors versus their loan? And those things. That's what actually has to be looked at with these different types of financial structures, because, you know, it's very important for the immigration process to hit. As mentioned, we have 100% approval track record, investors obtaining their permanent residency. That's very important, but it's just as important to get your $800,000 back, right? And so I think that's what you have to do as an EB5 investor, is look at the EB5 investment from two perspectives. One, can I get my permanent residency through this investment? And two, can I get my money back? And as Sonia mentioned, we'd be more than glad to talk to you about that as you reach out to us. And that's what I would like to close with. And Neil and Sonia, if you'd like to add any closing statements here, once again, thank you so much for participating again with us, Neil. We truly appreciate it. And please feel free to add any closing statements that you would like.
No, absolutely. No. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Manuel, and Sonia as well. And yeah, look, I mean, I've seen quite a few South African investors successfully exit out of EB5. In fact, they got their money back, they got their investment back. They very happily reside in the US, and move has been good. And yeah, look, and it can be quite a minefield. And fortunately, I was fortunate to be involved with the US Invest conference. Of course, Sonia was there. You went at First Pathway Partners at that particular time, but I managed to meet the other guys. So I had the opportunity of sort of having a helicopter view of what's on show. And it's quite interesting. It's not only real estate, these trucking businesses, and there's a whole lot of other sort of opportunities, which I thought, well, if you're not a real estate person, it becomes very difficult to understand those kind of, opportunities. And I think First Pathway Partners, I think the key is, you mentioned the whole due diligence process, having an expert like yourself to help you and guide you. And the project that you got seems really top quality projects. And you haven't actually mentioned one or two of your projects. It's probably worthwhile mentioning some of those real estate projects that you have, because compared to the rest, it's some really top quality stuff. And then, yeah, look, I think in terms of that, the jobs you create, I understand from that, because I think it's an incredible program. I don't understand why in South Africa they wouldn't do something like that for investors who take. I don't think they've even thought about it. In fact, I think we're trying to chase everybody to the US. So I think we're trying to do the opposite of what the EB5 is happening. But I think it's an incredible program, and yeah, so I like the real estate side of things, and it is good to hear that I know that people that have invested in EB5 after their 5 year, they got their money back. So it's look, there has been one or two, some reports where some people have not got the same, so they have been indifferent. But the program itself, it's really a good program, and I think you guys are driving your particular quality type projects that you've got. I think really top quality stuff.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I think you bring up some really good points. The way that the US government designed the program is that the investor funds have to be at risk. But that doesn't mean that you can't structure the project in a conservative way to protect the investors. And I think that's what's really important. And you mentioned some of our previous projects. I'm actually staying at one here. I'm in California this week, and I'm staying here at JW Marriott project that we did some years ago, where it's a 10-minute walk to Disneyland. So I won't be wearing any mouse ears today. I've got some meetings after this, but it just speaks to the type of quality projects that we actually do. And Sonia, if you'd like to add anything as well, please go ahead.
Sure. So I've also stayed at one of our projects when I went over, to the office, and I went to see my son graduate, from the Navy. So I stayed in the Kimpton. Kimpton was amazing. The rooms are large, and I didn't quite understand. They had a little dog, or a blackboard, and they had names on. And some of our projects, you can actually bring your dogs with you, and they're really treated with royal treatment. So that I find really unusual. And yes, so I had the privilege of actually going around and looking at some of our projects that are on our website. We've done a loft, as Manuel said, we've done Marriott, and we've also partnered with a lot of really, really big developers, so they've had a lot of skin in the projects as well. And yeah, and also ultra luxury developments, I think are in high demand. And a lot of the areas are outdated. I think a lot of areas need new accommodation, and get away from the Airbnbs, because there is no accommodation available, in certain areas. And yes, I'm very excited to actually go and see the new development that we've got. So hopefully I'll be lucky enough to do that. But Manuel is also there. He meets everybody in the United States. You take a trip out there and go to our offices anytime, and Manuel takes people on tours, and you get a real good feel for what it's all about. So I just want to encourage you, if you are looking at getting permanent residency or even citizenship, after a 5-year period, come and talk to us. We'll be happy to assist you. And thank you, Neil, again. And thank you, Manuel. Thank you for today.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you both. Truly appreciate it. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And thank you once again, everybody. Have a great day.
You should.